When I was younger, I read a fantasy book that had an invisible maze. And inside the maze, the walls would kill you as soon as you touched them. For the longest time, I wanted to build something like that in Minecraft. And while it seemed impossible, a few recent updates have given me the ability to make it. And so here's the exit, and so far, I've stayed on the correct path. However, if I were to stray from the path, so for example here, very quickly there will be an angry warden approaching me and shooting me with that sonic blast. And if you try to run around in there, the warden will still be able to reach you from anywhere inside there. So, how does it work? The basic premise of this maze is that the player will shoot an arrow, and this arrow, the entire time while the player is in the maze, the warden will be listening to it and getting angry. Once the arrow gets far enough, the door will open, and as soon as the player walks onto any of these gray carpets, then the door will close. I'm definitely not the best at making redstone doors, that's definitely not my specialty. Now, inside of this central pyramid, I have several calibrated sculk sensors listening for illegal player sounds. And so this one right here is set to amplitude 4, or frequency 4. And so this listens for any player using an elytra, because I want them to actually solve the maze and not just fly through it. This one's listening for the sounds of blocks being destroyed, or blocks being placed, any teleporting, and finally, block activating. And so for this one, it actually listens to all of the sculk shriekers that will activate fence gates when they are stepped on. However, you might notice that the correct path doesn't have any observers and fence gates below them. This was the only way I could figure out how to actually detect a shrieker going off, with just an observer below it with fence gate, and that calibrated sculk sensor is now listening for that frequency level 10 that listens for any fence gates going off. And so as soon as one of those calibrated sculk sensors hears one of those illegal player sounds, that goes into this downward signal generator, and that just sends the warden up. And so here, when we have an update there, it'll send the soul send that way. When one of the calibrated sculk sensors listening for illegal player sounds goes off, it will also send a wireless signal through the floor using a dispenser, and that will close off the door as quickly as possible so that the player can't run and escape out that way. There is also a network of calibrated sculk sensors beneath here that are listening for frequency level 15, entity die or explode. This will activate when the player dies, and the amethyst resonates that signal all the way over to this one, where the signal branches out a couple ways. Over this way, it will send a signal down to here that will make sure that the warden descends so that it is reset for the next person. And then it'll also close the exit door just in case. And there will be a wire, and the wire also goes this way, and this causes a small decay circuit that kind of shuts off the player clock, that where the sculk sensor is listening for the projectile to be falling. And so as we have that arrow fall down this way, normally this clock works based on the sculk sensor listening for that arrow falling. However, when we have this decay circuit, it blocks that signal from going through. Down here we have a system that makes it so that the soul sand will only extend once while the machine is running. This just makes it so that we're guaranteed to have the warden descend when we're trying to reset it. Otherwise, there are so many sounds running through here while the machine is resetting that oftentimes it'll keep on trying to push out. And so this just waits, and after we get the reset signal, we reset this memory circuit to be nothing afterwards. So right now, no matter how many times we try to activate this again, the soul sand isn't, this piston with the soul sand isn't extending anymore. This just makes it so that while we're resetting, we have that warden guaranteed to come down once the magma blocks gets pushed over. So that's the overview of the main components of how this works, but there are a few flaws with it. The first one is that when a player tries to go through, if they are really quick in setting off the exit, it will take a long time for the warden to actually get angry enough so that the player dies. And so we'll just be waiting here for the warden to build up its anger before it will actually attack the player. The only ways that I thought about possibly fixing this is forcing the player to stay outside the maze while the warden builds its anger up. The only issue with that is that the warden has to be within 30 blocks of the player in order to be angry from a projectile. And so here, we're actually finally dead from that. And so it is definitely quite slow when it comes to actually killing someone. For someone going through here the first time, I think they'll wait at the entrance for a little while figuring out what to do. And so then that death will kind of come unexpected since they won't really be certain which of the shriekers went off. The second flaw is a little more annoying to work with. And so when the player shoots the arrow to enter, the door will open. And up here on these signs, I say that if they try to use the elytra in the maze, that they'll die. That isn't always the case, though, unfortunately. So if you try to immediately just fly up and out, the door closes very quickly, as you would hope. But then the warden just descends. The reason for this can be found in our book that tells the calibrated sculk sensors what to listen for. It turns out that a firework rocket counts as an entity, and when that firework extinguishes, it counts as an entity death. And so, when that goes off, you can see that it dies, and then the reset circuit was activated, and so the warden descends. And so, if there were a boat, an armor stand, a firework rocket in there, the maze can't tell the difference between one of those dying versus the player dying. I thought about trying to use sculk catalysts to detect a player death, but then all the walls would have to be covered in buttons or glow lichen or something to make sure that the sculk doesn't spread. And there's not a whole lot of space in here to make sure that the entire maze is going to be covered in here, since I also have to have some above, it's because of how tall the room is right now. So that's a flaw that I really don't know how to fix. I need some way to detect a player dying, so that it knows properly when to reset. That doesn't depend on calibrated sculk sensors. One of the worst issues is that on a server, if you have a friend to help you break out of the maze, then it becomes very easy to escape the warden and just break out the exit. And so here, I have the target block at an angle so that you can't use the dispenser. With the dispenser, the arrow doesn't have any player attached to it, and so the warden won't get angry from that projectile. And so the player has to shoot their bow into here. And then the door doesn't open until the arrow gets all the way down and into this trap. When we have this circuit turn on, that just sends a signal all the way up to the door, and then that opens it. But if we have one player open the door, and the other person go in, they don't have anything to worry about from the warden, since I mean, they can just break out since the warden won't be able to do anything to them. And then, so that's, yeah. Or if they wanted to actually not break any blocks to do it, they could simply have one person open the door, the other person go in, and then walk through all the shriekers, and having their captions turned on to see which ones activate fence gates and which ones don't activate fence gates, if they wanted to find the path through that. And so 2 players have a lot of ways to make this maze not work. Aside from those few flaws that seem very, very difficult to fix, at least right now with Minecraft, I'm really proud of how this turned out. It's really fun to try to remember the invisible maze that you made. It's not quite a maze since I only have a single path that doesn't have any branches in it, since not many players would spend more than one try getting through it. But it's fun memorizing the path and escaping right over the top of the warden before you get up here to whatever you've stored up here. If you have any questions about how this maze works, just drop them in the comments and I'll try to answer them the best I can. Maybe I'll make a second version of this maze if I can figure out a way to make an improvement on one of those 3 flaws. Until then, see ya!